The knock came at 4:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone for the past 2 hours, unable to sleep, scrolling through apartment listings I couldn't afford. The sound of knuckles against wood, firm, authoritative, unmistakably official, sent ice through my veins. Nobody knocks on your door before sunrise with good news. I pulled on a sweatshirt and crept down the hallway of my childhood home, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out a silhouette. The uniform was unmistakable even in shadow, military dress blues, the kind they wear for ceremonies. The kind they wear for notifications. My first thought was Dad. Had something happened to my father? But Dad was upstairs, asleep in the master bedroom. I'd heard him snoring when I passed by an hour ago during one of my anxious trips to the bathroom. So who? Elena Rodriguez? The officer's voice was measured, professional. Female. She couldn't have been much older than me. Yes. My voice came out smaller than I intended. I'm Lieutenant Jessica Morris. May I come in? This concerns a matter of significant legal importance. Legal importance. Not a death notification then. Something else. Something that made my stomach twist into knots I couldn't name. I opened the door, and that's when I saw the manila envelope in her hands. Official seals. Government letterhead visible through the transparent window. My name typed in neat, impersonal letters. What's this about? I asked, though some deep, primal part of me already knew the answer would shatter everything. The lieutenant stepped inside, her eyes scanning the living room, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the worn couch where I'd spent countless evenings, the home that had been my sanctuary for 23 years. When her gaze returned to me, there was something in her expression that looked almost like pity. Elena Rodriguez, you are hereby notified that you have been selected for mandatory service under the Emergency Conscription Act, Section 7, Subsection 4. Your deployment begins in 72 hours. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mandatory service? Deployment? That was impossible. The draft had been reinstated 6 months ago, yes, but only for men aged 18 to 35. Women weren't. There must be a mistake, I stammered. I'm not eligible. The draft doesn't. Section 7, Subsection 4 addresses special circumstances. Lieutenant Morris interrupted gently. In cases where a family member volunteers a substitute for their own conscription, the Department of Defense has the authority to accept qualified alternatives regardless of standard eligibility requirements. The room tilted. A family member volunteered me? That's insane. Nobody can volunteer someone else for. Your father, Thomas Rodriguez, submitted the substitution request 17 days ago. It was approved yesterday at 1,600 hours. The floor dropped out from under me. Dad. My own father had volunteered me to take his place in a war I'd only seen on news broadcasts. A conflict in the Pacific that had already claimed thousands of lives. The same father who'd promised, just last month over Sunday dinner, that our family would never be touched by the draft. The same man who'd held me when I was 6 years old and promised he'd always protect me. That can't be legal, I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew the truth. The emergency powers legislation had rewritten so many rules, suspended so many protections. If there was a loophole, someone would have found it. The substitution clause was designed to keep essential workers in critical positions, Lieutenant Morris explained, her tone softening slightly. Your father is listed as a senior infrastructure engineer. His exemption request was denied 3 times. The substitution was his only option to avoid deployment. So he threw me to the wolves instead. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. The lieutenant said nothing. She simply extended the manila envelope. My hands shook as I took it. Inside were orders, medical examination schedules, equipment lists, and a single sheet of paper that made my blood run cold. A notarized affidavit bearing my father's signature, formally requesting that his daughter, Elena Maria Rodriguez, serve in his stead. There was more text below, but one sentence stood out, highlighted in yellow. I hereby certify that the proposed substitute has been informed of and consents to this arrangement. I never consented to anything, I said, my voice rising. I didn't even know this was possible. Lieutenant Morris's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. According to our records, you signed a consent form on January 3rd. I never signed anything. She pulled a tablet from her bag and turned it toward me. On the screen was a document, the consent form, and there at the bottom was a signature that looked exactly like mine. The loops of the E, the sharp downstroke of the R, even the way I crossed my Z. It was perfect. Too perfect. My mind raced back to January 3rd. What had I been doing? It was right after New Year's. I'd been home for the holidays, and Dad had asked me to sign some tax documents, something about dependent exemptions and… Oh God! He forged it, I breathed. He buried it in a stack of other papers, and I signed without reading everything. The lieutenant's expression told me she'd seen this before. Maybe not this exact scenario, but something close enough. Families betraying families. Survival instincts overriding love. You have 72 hours to report to Fort Benning for basic training, she said quietly. The address is in your packet. If you fail to report, you'll be classified as a deserter and subject to immediate arrest. And if I challenge this? Get a lawyer. You can try. But legal proceedings take time, and your deployment date is fixed. The moment those 72 hours expire, the charges begin. She paused. I've seen people fight this, Elena. I've never seen anyone win. She moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. There's a family meeting scheduled for 0700 hours this morning. Your presence is expected. A family meeting. How civilized. How utterly insane. After the lieutenant left, I stood in the foyer holding the envelope like it was a live grenade. Upstairs, I could hear movement, footsteps in the hallway, the creak of the bathroom door. My family was waking up, going about their morning routines, preparing for a meeting to discuss how they'd casually sentenced me to potential death. I thought about running, just grabbing my keys and disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. But where would I go? How long could I last as a fugitive? And what about my younger sister, Nina? She was only 19, still in college. If I ran, would they come for her next? The living room was still dark except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains. In that dim glow, I caught sight of a photograph on the mantel. Our family last Christmas, all of us smiling, Dad's arm around my shoulders. He'd just told a terrible joke, something about reindeer and tax brackets, and we were all laughing. I picked up the frame and stared at his face, searching for some sign of the betrayal to come. But there was nothing. Just my father, looking happy and ordinary and completely, utterly unrecognizable. The stairs creaked behind me. Elena! It was Mom's voice, tentative and afraid. Honey, I heard the door. Was that? I turned to face her, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She'd known. Maybe not all the details, maybe not the exact timeline, but she'd known Dad was going to do this. How long? I asked. How long have you known he was planning to sacrifice me? Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No forgiveness. We need to talk about this as a family, she said, which wasn't an answer at all. A family. I laughed, and it sounded broken even to my own ears. Is that what we are? I walked past her toward the stairs, still clutching the envelope. I needed to shower, to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with the next 72 hours of my civilian life. But as I climbed those familiar steps, I realized something that made my skin crawl. This had never been a home. It had been a holding cell, and I'd been too naive to see the bars. The family meeting was in 45 minutes, and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say when I walked into that kitchen and faced the people who were supposed to love me. What I did know was that nothing would ever be the same again, and the worst part was wondering what else they'd been hiding. What other betrayals were waiting to surface now that the first terrible truth had been revealed? The kitchen smelled like coffee and betrayal. I'd taken the longest shower of my life, standing under scalding water until my skin turned red, trying to wash away the disbelief that clung to me like oil. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel and facing my closet, I'd made a decision. If this was going to be a tribunal, I'd dress like the accused I was. Jeans. Black t-shirt. My oldest, most comfortable boots. Were clothes, in a way. Now, sitting at the kitchen table at 7:03 a.m., I watched my family arrange themselves like players in a stage production. Dad at the head of the table, his reading glasses perched on his nose as if this were just another Sunday morning. Mom to his right, hands wrapped around her coffee mug like it was a life preserver. Nina across from me, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. At least my sister had been crying. Elena, Dad began, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when explaining complex engineering problems. I know this comes as a shock. A shock. I interrupted him for the first time in my life. You forged my signature on military documents and condemned me to a war zone, and you think it's a shock. He flinched but recovered quickly. I understand you're upset. Upset. My laugh was sharp enough to cut. Dad, I'm going to Fort Benning in 3 days. I'm going to learn how to kill people, how to not get killed, And then they're going to ship me to the Pacific where the casualty rate is 63%. Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. Nina made a small sound, almost a whimper. I glanced at her and saw genuine anguish in her face. She hadn't known. Whatever role Mom and Dad had played in this nightmare, they'd at least had the decency or the cowardice to keep Nina in the dark. Let me explain the situation, Dad continued, and I noticed he couldn't quite meet my eyes. The infrastructure grid for the entire Southwest Corridor is failing. They need engineers with my specific expertise to prevent cascading blackouts that could affect 30 million people. When my draft notice came, I applied for an exemption based on essential worker status. 4 times. All denied. So you found a loophole, I said flatly. I found a solution. His voice gained strength, and I recognized the shift. This was Dad moving into justification mode, the same way he defended his designs at work. The substitution clause exists precisely for situations like this. One person serves, the family sacrifice is honored, and critical infrastructure gets maintained. Everyone wins. Everyone except me. You're 23 years old, Elena. You're young, fit, you have no dependents, no career that can't be resumed after service. I have a life. The words exploded out of me. I have plans. I was supposed to start grad school in September. I have friends, a boyfriend, had a boyfriend. I corrected bitterly, thinking of Jake and how I'd have to break this news to him. You stole my entire future because it was more convenient than facing your own draft notice. Mom spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. We thought about this for weeks, honey. It wasn't a snap decision. We looked at every angle. Did you look at the angle where you asked me? I turned my fury on her. Did you consider, even for a moment, having an actual conversation before you forged legal documents in my name? She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. You would have said no. The honesty of it was stunning. At least she wasn't pretending I'd have volunteered willingly. You're damn right I would have said no, I replied. Because I'm a human being with agency over my own life. Or at least, I thought I was. Dad set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Elena, I need you to understand something. If I'd gone, your mother would have been alone. She has the heart condition, she can't work full-time anymore. Nina's tuition, the mortgage, your grandmother's nursing home costs. All of that falls on my salary. If I'd deployed, we'd have lost everything. And now I might lose my life, but at least the mortgage is covered. I shot back. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about finances while I'm talking about survival. The survival rate for support positions is much higher than combat roles, he said, pulling out a piece of paper covered in his neat handwriting. Statistics. He'd made a spreadsheet of my probable death. Based on your education and skills, you'll likely be assigned to communications or logistics. Relatively safe positions, statistically speaking. Statistically speaking, I repeated numbly. You know what else is a statistic, Dad? The number of daughters who get sold out by their own fathers. I wonder where I fall on that chart. Nina finally spoke, her voice cracking. Elena, I'm so sorry. I didn't know anything until yesterday. They told me at the same time they told you, basically. I've been up all night trying to figure out how to. How to what? I asked, softer now. This wasn't Nina's fault. How to fix it? There's no fixing this. In 72 hours, I'm government property. We could run, Nina whispered, leaning forward. Both of us. We could go to Canada, or Mexico, or... And make you a fugitive too? I shook my head. No, that's not happening. Dad cleared his throat. I've already spoken to a lawyer, just to make sure everything is legally sound. The substitution is ironclad. But here's what I want you to know. I'm going to take care of everything while you're gone. Your student loans, your car payment, everything. When you come home, you'll have a clean slate financially. If I come home, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom broke it with a sob she couldn't quite suppress. Don't say that. Don't even think it. You're coming home. You have to come home. Why? The question came out harder than I intended. So you can feel less guilty about what you did. So you can pretend you didn't trade your daughter's life for your convenience. It wasn't like that, Dad insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Then what was it like? I demanded. Explain it to me. Make me understand how the man who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia, who cried at my high school graduation. Make me understand how that man could do this. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than malice or coldness. It was fear. Bone-deep, primal fear. I was terrified, he admitted. When that draft notice came, I felt like I was drowning. I'm 56 years old, Elena. I haven't done a push-up in 20 years. I'd have died in basic training, or gotten someone else killed because I couldn't keep up. And then I found out about the substitution clause, and I thought you'd have a chance. A real chance. You're strong, you're smart, you're young enough to survive this. So you made the choice for me. I made the choice to keep this family intact, he said firmly. Maybe that makes me a monster. Maybe you'll never forgive me. But in 6 months, or a year, or whenever this war ends and you come home, you'll still have a home to come back to. That's what I saved. I stood up, my chair scraping against the tile floor with a sound like a scream. You saved a house, Dad. You destroyed a family. There's a difference. I walked out of the kitchen and headed for the front door, grabbing my keys from the hook. I needed air, space, anywhere but this suffocating room with these people who looked like my family but acted like strangers. Where are you going? Mom called after me. Somewhere I can think, I shouted back. Somewhere I can figure out how to say goodbye to my entire life in 3 days. I was halfway to my car when Nina caught up with me, grabbing my arm. Elena, wait. Please. I turned to face her, and the anguish in her expression cracked something in my chest. Nina, I can't do this right now. I know, she said quickly. I know, and I'm not asking you to forgive them or even talk to them. I need you to know that I had no idea. And I need you to know that if there was any way for me to take your place, I would. In a heartbeat. I pulled her into a hug, and we stood there in the driveway, clinging to each other as the morning sun crept over the rooftops. My little sister, who I'd protected from bullies and heartbreak and all the small cruelties of growing up. Who I wouldn't be able to protect anymore because I'd be half a world away, if I survived at all. You have to promise me something, I whispered into her hair. Anything. Don't let them rewrite this story. Don't let them convince you, or themselves, that this was noble or necessary, or anything other than what it is. Promise me. She pulled back, tears streaming down her face. I promise. Elena, I promise. I got in my car and drove, not caring where I was going, just needing to move. The manila envelope sat in my passenger seat like a coiled snake, and every time I glanced at it, I felt my stomach turn. I ended up at the beach, the same stretch of sand where I'd spent countless summers. It was early enough that I was alone except for a few joggers in the distance. I sat on the hood of my car and watched the waves, trying to imagine what my life would look like in a week, a month, 6 months. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Good morning, beautiful. Coffee later? I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to respond. How do you tell someone you're being deployed to a war zone because your father forged your signature? How do you say goodbye to a relationship that was just starting to feel like it might be something real? Before I could type a response, another text came through. This one from an unknown number. Elena Rodriguez? This is Captain Jennifer Walsh, U.S. Army JAG Corps. Lieutenant Morris forwarded me your case. I may have some information that could help you. Can you call me ASAP? My heart jumped. A military lawyer reaching out to me? That couldn't be standard procedure. I dialed the number with shaking hands, and she picked up on the first ring. Ms. Rodriguez, she said briskly. I don't have much time, so I'll be direct. Your father's substitution request has some irregularities that might constitute fraud. If we can prove he intentionally deceived you during the signing process, the entire agreement could be voided. Hope bloomed in my chest, painful and desperate. Can you prove it? That's the problem, Captain Walsh said. I'd need evidence, emails, text messages, recorded conversations, anything showing premeditation. And I'd need it fast. Do you have anything like that? I thought about Dad's home office, his computer, his files. Would he have been careless enough to leave a trail? I might, I said slowly. But I'd have to look. Then look, she said urgently. Because there's something else you need to know, something they probably didn't tell you. Section 7, Subsection 4 substitutions are being sent to the most dangerous assignments first. They're considered voluntary deployments, which means you don't get the same protections as draftees. Your frontline material, Elena. The statistic your father quoted about support positions? That doesn't apply to you. The beach blurred as tears filled my eyes. How dangerous are we talking? The last batch of Section 7 substitutes was deployed to the forward operating bases in the conflict zone. Current casualty rate is 87%. 87%. My father had sentenced me to almost certain death, and called it statistics. How much time do I have? I asked, my voice barely audible over the waves. 72 hours until you report. But realistically? If you're going to find evidence, you need to do it in the next 24. After that, I won't have time to file the necessary motions before your deployment window closes." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. 24 hours to search my father's records, find proof of his deception, and potentially save my own life. But it would mean going back to that house, facing those people, and gambling everything on evidence that might not even exist. The sun was fully up now, painting the ocean in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful, and I found myself wondering if this was the last time I'd see it. The last time I'd feel sand under my feet, and hear seagulls crying overhead. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jake. "You okay? You're usually up by now." "No," I typed back. "Not okay. Can you meet me? I need to tell you something, and I'd rather do it in person." His response came immediately. "Of course. Where?" I gave him the address of a coffee shop near campus, somewhere neutral and public where I wouldn't fall apart completely. Then I sat on the hood of my car for another 10 minutes, gathering the courage to do what needed to be done. I had to go back to that house. I had to search my father's office. And I had to do it without him knowing what I was looking for, because if he caught me and destroyed the evidence, I was as good as dead. But first, I had to break Jake's heart and say goodbye to the life I'd thought I'd have. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, my hand steady on the wheel even as my world crumbled around me. In the rearview mirror, I watched the beach disappear, and I wondered if the girl who'd sat on that hood, watching the waves and trying to make sense of the impossible, would survive long enough to come back. Or if she was already gone, replaced by whatever I'd have to become to make it through the next 72 hours, and whatever came after. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 100 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. Jake took the news exactly the way I knew he would, with quiet devastation. We sat in the corner booth of the coffee shop, my untouched latte going cold between us while I explained everything. The pre-dawn knock, the forged signature, the deployment orders. His face cycled through shock, anger, disbelief, and finally settled on something that looked like grief. "This can't be legal," he said for the third time, as if repetition could change reality. "There has to be something we can do. A lawyer, a lawsuit, media attention." "There's one option," I interrupted, and told him about Captain Walsh's call, about the evidence I needed to find, and the 24 hours I had to find it. His expression hardened with determination I'd never seen before. "Then we search. We tear that house apart if we have to. I'll help you." "No." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Jake, if this goes wrong, if I get caught breaking into my dad's files, I could make things worse. Add criminal charges on top of everything else. I need you safe, separate from this. My voice cracked. "I need you to be here when I get back. If I get back." "Don't talk like that," he said fiercely. "You're coming back. We're going to find the evidence, void this nightmare substitution, and you're going to start grad school in September exactly like we planned." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But I'd seen the statistics, heard the edge in Captain Walsh's voice when she quoted that 87% casualty rate. "And if we don't find anything?" I asked quietly. "If there's no evidence, or if it's not enough?" He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "Then I wait for you," he finally said. "However long it takes. I wait." We sat there for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. His summer research position, my abandoned thesis proposal, the trip to Portland we'd been planning for August. Normal things, future things, as if saying them out loud could make them real. As if we could manifest a tomorrow that hadn't been stolen from us. When I finally left, he walked me to my car and kissed me like it might be the last time. Maybe it was. Probably it was. I drove away watching him in the rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared, and I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through the tears. By the time I got back to the house, it was noon. Dad's car was gone. He'd gone into the office, probably to handle the essential infrastructure, work that was supposedly worth more than my life. Mom was at her book club, because apparently betraying your daughter was no reason to cancel social engagements. And Nina had texted that she was at the library, giving me space. Perfect. I had the house to myself and maybe 3 hours before anyone returned. Dad's office was on the second floor, a converted bedroom filled with filing cabinets, engineering textbooks, and a massive desk dominated by 2 monitors. I'd been in here 1,000 times before, usually to ask him technical questions about my own schoolwork or to borrow a stapler. Now I stood in the doorway feeling like a burglar in my own home. Where would he keep evidence of premeditation? Emails seemed most likely, a trail of correspondence with lawyers or military officials, discussing how to implement the substitution without my knowledge. I sat down at his computer and wiggled the mouse. Password protected. Of course. I tried the obvious ones first: Mom's birthday, Nina's birthday, their anniversary. All failed. Then I noticed a post-it note stuck to the bottom of his monitor, partially hidden. Yenji 2024 Infracore. His work password. Dad had always been terrible about security, using variations of the same password across multiple accounts. I tried it, replacing infra with home. The screen unlocked. I was in his email within seconds, searching for keywords: substitution, Elena, draft, military. The results made my stomach clench. There were dozens of messages dating back almost 2 months. Correspondence with a lawyer named Harold Chun, discussing the technical aspects of voluntary substitution protocols. Emails to and from a military liaison officer, outlining the paperwork requirements. And then, buried in a thread from January 2nd, one day before he'd tricked me into signing, a message that made my blood run cold. Harold confirmed that will be home for the holidays. Will present the substitution consent as part of standard tax documents. She never reads these carefully, just signs where I indicate. Per your advice, I'll include enough legitimate paperwork to obscure the military forms. She trusts me implicitly, so this should proceed without complications. One concern: my wife is having second thoughts about the deception. She's worried will never forgive us. I've explained that by the time discovers the truth, it will be too late to reverse the process, and she'll understand we did this for the family. Still, please confirm the timeline is ironclad. Best, Thomas. I read it 3 times, each pass making me feel sicker. The calculated deception, the manipulation of my trust, the casual dismissal of Mom's concerns. It was all there, documented in his own words. I found Harold Chen's response in the next email. Thomas, the timeline is indeed ironclad once the documents are filed. However, I must again stress the ethical concerns here. While technically legal under current statutes, deceiving your daughter about the nature of documents she's signing could constitute fraud if challenged. My professional recommendation remains: have an honest conversation with Elena and obtain genuine consent. That said, if you proceed as planned, ensure the consent form is filed with the military within 48 hours of signature. After that point, challenging the substitution becomes exponentially more difficult. Regarding your wife's concerns, she's right to worry. This will damage your family relationships, potentially permanently. You need to decide if that cost is worth the benefit. Harold. My father's response, sent just hours later, was brief. Understood. Proceeding as planned. Will file within 24 hours. I sat back in his chair, my hands shaking. This was it. This was the evidence Captain Walsh needed. Proof that Dad had intentionally deceived me, that his lawyer had warned against it, that he'd proceeded anyway with full knowledge of the consequences. I forwarded the entire email thread to my personal account, then to Captain Walsh's email address with a subject line: Urgent. Evidence of fraud in substitution case, Elena Rodriguez. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Ms. Rodriguez, I just got your email, Captain Walsh said, speaking so quickly I could barely keep up. This is exactly what we need. The explicit acknowledgement of deception, the lawyer's warning about fraud, the timeline manipulation. This is a slam dunk case for voiding the substitution. So I don't have to go. The hope in my voice was painful. Not if I can file the motion before 1,700 hours today and get an emergency hearing. Which means I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to come to Fort Hamilton and give a formal sworn statement. Can you be here in 90 minutes? I looked at the clock. 12:47 p.m. Fort Hamilton was an hour away in good traffic, maybe more at this time of day. I can try. Don't try. Do it. This is our window, Elena. After 1,700 hours, the system logs your deployment as locked, and everything gets exponentially harder. I'll have the paperwork ready when you arrive. Just get here as fast as you can. She hung up before I could respond. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard the front door open. Dad's voice called out. Elena? You home? My blood turned to ice. He wasn't supposed to be back until after 5. I glanced at my phone, 12:51 p.m. If I got stuck in a conversation with him now, I'd never make it to Fort Hamilton in time. Yeah, I'm here. I called back, trying to keep my voice normal. Just heading out. I heard his footsteps in the foyer. Wait, I need to talk to you about something. It's important. Of course it was. The universe apparently had a sick sense of humor. I came down the stairs to find him standing by the door, blocking my exit. His tie was loosened, his expression weary but determined. In his hand was a folder, more paperwork, probably some other way to screw me over. I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, he said. About how I handled this whole situation. And I want to make something clear to you. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 12:53. Every second of this conversation was eating into my window. Dad, can this wait? I really need to. No, it can't wait, he interrupted, his voice firm. I need you to understand that what I did out of love. Out of a desire to protect this family. You think I'm a monster, but I'm just a father trying to keep everyone safe. The audacity of it stole my breath. He was standing there, asking for understanding, while I had evidence of his betrayal burning in my phone, while I had less than 90 minutes to get to Fort Hamilton and potentially save my life. I understand perfectly, I said, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. You made a choice. You chose yourself over me. That's crystal clear. His jaw tightened. That's not fair, Elena. You're young. You don't understand the impossible positions that adults sometimes face. The choices that have no good answers. You're right, I said, moving toward the door. I don't understand how a father betrays his daughter. Maybe I never will. Now if you'll excuse me. He didn't move. Where are you going? Out. I need to clear my head. We should talk about the logistics, he pressed. Your deployment prep, what you need to bring, how we'll handle communication once you're overseas. I said not now. The shout surprised both of us. I'd never raised my voice to my father before. Never. He stepped back, hurt flashing across his face, and I felt a sick satisfaction at seeing him wounded. Good. Let him hurt. Let him feel a fraction of what he'd done to me. I pushed past him and out the door, my heart pounding. My car keys were in my hand, my phone showing 12:57 p.m. I had 73 minutes to make a 60-minute drive, give a sworn statement, and save my own life. I was backing out of the driveway when I saw Dad appear at the front door, his phone pressed to his ear. Something in his posture made my stomach drop. Who was he calling? I didn't have time to worry about it. I gunned the engine and headed for the highway, breaking at least 3 traffic laws in the first 10 minutes. The roads were mercifully clear, and I made good time until I hit a construction zone on the interstate. 1:23 p.m. Stopped dead in traffic, watching cars idle ahead of me in an endless line. My phone showed 37 minutes until my window closed. I called Captain Walsh. I'm stuck in traffic, I said without preamble. Construction on I-95. I'm trying, but I don't know if I can make it by 1700. How far out are you? Maybe 20 miles. But nothing's moving. I heard her curse under her breath. Okay, listen carefully. I'm going to try to buy us more time by filing a preliminary motion right now. It won't be as strong without your statement, but it might be enough to at least delay your deployment while we investigate. But Elena, you need to understand, if they deny this preliminary motion, you're out of options. The deployment stands, and you report in 48 hours. Do it, I said. File whatever you can. The traffic started moving, agonizingly slowly. I crept forward, watching the clock tick down. 1:31, 1:45, 1:52. At 2:08 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it anyway. Elena Rodriguez? A man's voice, official and cold. This is Major Dennis Palmer, U.S. Army Personnel Command. I'm calling to inform you that we've received notification of a legal challenge to your deployment orders. Until this matter is resolved, you are to remain within a 50-mile radius of your current residence and make yourself available for questioning. Do you understand? I understand, I managed. Good. A hearing has been scheduled for 0900 tomorrow morning at Fort Hamilton. Your presence is mandatory. Failure to appear will result in immediate deployment regardless of the challenge's outcome. He hung up. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't grip the wheel. The preliminary motion had worked. I had a hearing. I had a chance. But when I looked at my phone, I saw 3 missed calls from Dad and a text message that made my blood freeze. I know what you did. We need to talk. Now. He'd found out about the emails. Somehow, he'd discovered I'd been in his office, in his computer, forwarding evidence to a military lawyer. And if he knew, that meant he had time to prepare. Time to spin a counter-narrative. Time to destroy whatever other evidence might exist. I'd won a battle, but I'd just telegraphed my entire strategy to the enemy. An enemy who happened to be my own father, who knew me better than anyone, who knew exactly how to manipulate me. The hearing was in 19 hours. I had no idea what my father would do in that time, but I knew it wouldn't be good. The man who'd forged my signature, who'd traded my life for his convenience, who'd documented his deception in emails he thought I'd never see. That man wouldn't go down without a fight. And the stakes couldn't be higher. Either I walked out of that hearing a free woman, or I walked out knowing I had 48 hours before I shipped out to a war zone with an 87% casualty rate. I pulled back onto the highway and headed home, my mind already racing through tomorrow's possibilities. Every scenario ended the same way. In that hearing room, facing my father across a table, fighting for my life while he fought to maintain his comfortable existence. One of us was going to lose. I just had to make sure it wasn't me. But as I drove through the darkening afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something. Some crucial detail that would only become clear when it was too late to matter, when the gavel fell and my fate was sealed one way or another. The question was, what was my father planning, and could I possibly prepare for it before morning came? The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway at 6:47 p.m. Not just dim, completely dark. Every window black, no porch light, no welcoming glow from the kitchen. It looked abandoned, haunted, like a house where something terrible had happened. Which, I supposed, was accurate. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine running, debating whether to go inside or just drive to a hotel and wait for tomorrow's hearing. But my clothes were in there, my documents, everything I'd need for what was basically a trial that would determine the entire trajectory of my life. I killed the engine and walked to the front door. It was unlocked, unusual for my security-conscious parents. I stepped inside and fumbled for the light switch. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Power's out. Dad's voice came from the living room, making me jump. Transformer blew about an hour ago. They say it'll be back by midnight. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and I could make out his silhouette sitting in his favorite armchair, utterly still. On the coffee table in front of him, a single candle burned, casting grotesque shadows across his face. "We need to talk," he said. "I have nothing to say to you." I moved toward the stairs, wanting only to grab my things and leave. "I read the emails you forwarded to Captain Walsh," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I have to admit I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you to go through my private files." I stopped on the third stair. "You forged my signature. You don't get to take the moral high ground about privacy." "Fair enough." I heard the clink of ice against glass. He was drinking, which was rare for him. "But you should know that your little evidence dump isn't quite the smoking gun you think it is." My stomach clenched. "What does that mean?" "It means I've been on the phone all afternoon with Harold Chun and several military officials. The emails you found? They show I had concerns about how to approach a difficult conversation with you. They don't prove fraud. They prove I was struggling with how to protect my family while being honest with you about a voluntary substitution." "Voluntary?" I whirled around to face him. "You tricked me into signing. You admitted it in those emails." "I admitted to being concerned about how you'd react to the proposal," he corrected calmly. Harold's warnings about fraud? He was being overly cautious, as lawyers do. "But the law is clear. A signature is a signature. You signed the consent form. Whether you fully understood what you were signing is, legally speaking, your responsibility as an adult." The world tilted. He'd already been working on his defense, reframing the narrative, transforming his calculated deception into parental concern. "The hearing tomorrow," I started. "Will go exactly as the military wants it to go," he interrupted. "Elena, do you really think they want to set a precedent that invalidates substitutions based on family members claiming they didn't read what they signed? Half the voluntary conscripts would suddenly discover they were deceived. The military has quotas to meet. They're not going to let you walk because you regret your decision." "It wasn't my decision." My voice cracked. "That's not how the paperwork reads." He stood up, moving closer to the stairs. In the candlelight, his features looked alien, unrecognizable. "I'm trying to help you understand what you're walking into tomorrow. Captain Walsh is a good lawyer, but she's bucking a system that doesn't want to budge. Your best-case scenario is they delay your deployment by a few weeks while they investigate. Worst case, they add charges for wasting military resources during a time of war. You've thought of everything, haven't you?" I said bitterly. "You always do." Every angle covered, every loophole closed. I'm an engineer. It's what I do. You're a monster. That's what you are. He flinched, and for just a moment, I saw something crack in his expression, genuine pain, or maybe just a convincing simulation of it. I'm a father who made an impossible choice. Someday, if you have children of your own, maybe you'll understand. If I survive long enough to have children, I shot back. If I make it through that 87% casualty rate you conveniently forgot to mention when you were calculating statistics. He went very still. What are you talking about? Section 7, Subsection 4 substitutes get sent to the front lines first. Voluntary deployments, no protections, highest risk assignments. Did you know that when you signed me up? Or was that just an unfortunate detail you overlooked? The silence stretched out, and in it, I found my answer. He hadn't known. Or he'd known and convinced himself the statistics were wrong. Either way, the look on his face told me this particular consequence had caught him off guard. That can't be right, he said finally. The recruiter told me. The recruiter lied. They always do. But Captain Walsh didn't. She gave me the real numbers, the actual assignments. You didn't just send me to war, Dad. You sent me to die. I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Nina, coming down from her room. She'd been listening to everything. Is it true? She asked Dad, her voice small and afraid. What Elena said about the casualty rates. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its certainty. I was told she'd be assigned to support positions. Communications, logistics. Safe positions. You were told what you wanted to hear, I said. And you didn't look deeper because that would have interfered with your plan to save yourself. Elena! He reached for me and I jerked away. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. Mom's voice came from upstairs. What's going on? Why is everyone shouting? Tell her, I said to Dad. Tell her about the 87%. Tell her that her daughter probably won't survive the next 6 months because you couldn't face boot camp. That's enough, he said sharply, his engineer's composure cracking completely. You think I wanted this? You think I planned for any of this to happen? The draft was supposed to stay limited, the war was supposed to be over by now, the exemptions were supposed to get approved. None of this was supposed to happen. But it did happen. I screamed, and 23 years of being the good daughter, the obedient child, the one who never made waves. All of it shattered in that moment. It happened, and instead of facing it yourself, you shoved me into the fire and called it love. The candle on the coffee table flickered and died, plunging us into complete darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard Mom descending the stairs, Nina's quiet crying, my own ragged breathing. And somewhere underneath it all, the sound of my father's world collapsing as he finally understood what he'd done. I'll testify tomorrow, he said quietly. At the hearing, I'll tell them the truth, that I misled you, that the consent wasn't truly informed. I'll void the substitution myself. I wanted to believe him. God, some part of me still desperately wanted to believe my father was capable of that kind of redemption. And then what? I asked. You get deployed instead? You who just admitted you'd die in basic training. Then I face what I should have faced months ago, he said. I faced the consequences of my own draft notice instead of passing them to my daughter. Thomas, no, Mom's voice cracked. You can't. We need you. The medical bills, the mortgage. We'll figure it out, he said firmly. Elena's right. I made a choice out of fear, and it was the wrong choice. Tomorrow I unmake it. I stood there in the darkness, trying to process what I was hearing. Was this real? Was he actually going to fix this? Or was it another manipulation, another calculated move in a game I didn't fully understand? I don't believe you, I said finally. You'll get to that hearing and find some other way to spin this. Some loophole or technicality that keeps you safe and keeps me on the deployment list. Elena, I swear to you. Your swears mean nothing to me anymore. Your promises, your assurances, your paternal authority, it's all worthless. You burned that bridge when you forged my signature. I heard him move in the darkness, heard the desperation in his breathing. Then what do you want from me? Tell me how to fix this, and I'll do it. I want you to live with it, I said coldly. I want you to spend every day I'm gone knowing that if I die, it's because of you. I want that weight on your conscience forever. That's the only punishment that fits what you've done. Elena, please, Nina's voice breaking. I'm going to my room, I said, my voice hollow. I need to prepare for tomorrow. Alone. I climbed the stairs in the dark, feeling my way along the familiar walls, and locked myself in my childhood bedroom. The same room where I'd done homework, had sleepovers, dreamed about my future. All those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now. Some naive girl who'd thought family meant safety. I lay on my bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to imagine tomorrow's hearing. Dad on the witness stand, either saving me or condemning me with his testimony. Captain Walsh fighting a system designed to chew up people like me. Military officials who needed bodies and didn't care whose signature was on the forms. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Thinking about you. How did it go today? I started to type a response 3 times and deleted it each time. How could I possibly explain the nightmare my life had become? How could I burden him with this when there was nothing he could do to help? Another text came through, this one from Captain Walsh. Spoke with your father this evening. He's agreed to testify that the consent was not properly informed. This is good, Elena. This significantly strengthens our case. Get some rest. Tomorrow we fight. I read it twice, trying to feel the hope it was supposed to inspire. But all I felt was exhaustion and a bone-deep certainty that nothing about tomorrow would be simple. The power came back on at 11:47 p.m., flooding my room with light. I got up to turn it off and caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable. In 48 hours, one way or another, my old life would be over. Either I'd be free, trying to rebuild a relationship with a family that had betrayed me, or I'd be at Fort Benning, learning how to survive a war I'd been drafted into through deception. Neither option felt like winning. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying the confrontation with Dad. The way his voice had broken when he'd offered to testify. The genuine shock when I'd told him about the casualty rates. The sound of Nina crying in the darkness. Was he really going to go through with it? Or would he find some way to save himself at the last minute, the way he always did? I fell asleep sometime after 3, and dreamed of courtrooms and uniforms and a manila envelope that kept multiplying, flooding the world with deployment orders that all had my name on them, signed in ink that looked exactly like mine but felt like blood. When my alarm went off, I woke with tears on my face and no memory of the moment I'd started crying. The hearing was in 3 hours. Whatever happened in that room would determine whether I lived or died, whether my father's betrayal stood or fell, whether our family could ever be whole again. I got dressed in my most professional clothes, a navy suit I'd bought for grad school interviews that would never happen now. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Hard eyes, set jaw, the expression of someone who'd learned too quickly that the people you trust can destroy you. Downstairs, I heard movement. My family, getting ready for the hearing that would determine all our futures. In 2 hours and 47 minutes, I'd walk into that hearing room. In 3 hours, I'd know if I had a future at all. And whatever happened, whatever the military decided, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The family I'd grown up with was already gone. These people downstairs, they were strangers wearing familiar faces, and no amount of testimony or legal maneuvering would ever change that. I was about to go to war, one way or another. The only question was which battlefield I'd be fighting on. The hearing room at Fort Hamilton was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured something grand and official, wood paneling, an elevated judge's bench, the theatrical gravity of courtrooms on TV. Instead, it was a sparse conference room with fluorescent lights, a long table, and chairs that looked like they'd been salvaged from a high school. The only indication this was anything special was the American flag in the corner, and the uniformed officials already seated when we arrived. Captain Walsh met us in the hallway, her expression taut with controlled tension. "The panel is ready for us," she said quietly. "Elena, remember what we discussed. Answer their questions directly, don't volunteer extra information, and stay calm no matter what they throw at you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dad stood a few feet away with Mom and Nina, a family unit I was no longer part of. He'd worn his best suit, the one he saved for engineering conferences, and he looked smaller somehow. Diminished. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw fear there. Whether it was fear of what he'd have to confess, or fear of facing his own deployment, I couldn't tell. Didn't care. "All parties, please enter," a voice called from inside the room. The panel consisted of 3 people. A stern-faced colonel named Morrison who looked like he'd never smiled in his life, a Major Henderson who couldn't have been older than 35, and a civilian legal advisor named Dr. Patricia Keene. Captain Walsh had explained that civilian oversight was required for substitution challenges. Some safeguard against military tribunals rubber-stamping everything. We took our seats on opposite sides of the table. Me and Captain Walsh on one side, Dad with his hastily retained lawyer on the other. Mom and Nina were relegated to chairs against the wall, observers to the destruction of our family. Colonel Morrison opened a thick folder and studied it for what felt like an eternity before speaking. This hearing is convened to address the challenge filed by Elena Rodriguez regarding her Section 7, Subsection 4 substitution deployment. Ms. Rodriguez, you claim your consent was obtained through fraudulent means. Is that correct? Yes, sir, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And Mr. Rodriguez, you've indicated you're willing to testify that the consent was not properly informed? Dad cleared his throat. Yes, Colonel. I made a mistake. A serious mistake. My daughter didn't fully understand what she was signing. Did you deliberately obscure the nature of the documents? Colonel Morrison's tone was flat, unreadable. This was it. The moment where Dad either damned himself to save me or found some weasel words to keep us both trapped. Dad's voice caught. I presented the military consent form among other documents. Tax papers, insurance forms. I indicated where she should sign without fully explaining what each document was. I told myself it was to spare her worry, but the truth is I was afraid she'd refuse if she understood. The room was absolutely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. So you admit to deliberately deceiving your daughter to obtain her signature? Dr. Keene leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. Dad's lawyer, a nervous man named Burton, jumped in. My client admits to poor judgment in how he presented the information, but deliberate deception is a strong characterization. Mr. Rodriguez was under extreme duress, facing his own deployment, and... Mr. Burton, Colonel Morrison interrupted, your client can either answer the question or decline to answer. What he cannot do is have you answer for him. Dad looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw him making the calculation in real time. Save himself with careful phrasing, or tell the unvarnished truth and accept the consequences. Yes, he said quietly. I deliberately deceived her. The emails Ms. Rodriguez submitted show that clearly. I planned it, I executed it, and I did it knowing it was wrong. My lawyer warned me it could constitute fraud. I did it anyway. I heard Mom make a small sound behind me, something between a gasp and a sob. Major Henderson spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle. Mr. Rodriguez, do you understand that this admission could result in criminal charges? That you're potentially confessing to fraud against the United States military? I understand, Dad said. And I'm prepared to face those consequences. What I'm not prepared to do is let my daughter pay for my cowardice. Captain Walsh was already moving, sensing our advantage. Given Mr. Rodriguez's admission of fraud, the military has clear grounds to void the substitution agreement. My client's signature was obtained through deception, which invalidates the consent. We request that Elena Rodriguez be immediately removed from deployment status, and that Thomas Rodriguez's original draft obligations be reinstated. Colonel Morrison exchanged glances with his fellow panel members. Some wordless communication passed between them. Captain Walsh, before we make any determinations, I have a question for Ms. Rodriguez. He turned his flat stare on me. You've heard your father's admission. You understand that if we void this substitution, he will be deployed instead. At 56 years old, with no military training, his chances of surviving basic training, let alone combat deployment, are statistically very low. Do you understand this? It was a trap, I realized. They were going to make me choose, my life or my father's. Make me live with the guilt either way. I understand, I said carefully. And you still want us to void the substitution? Knowing it will almost certainly result in your father's death. Captain Walsh cut in before I could answer. Colonel, with respect, that question is inappropriate. Ms. Rodriguez's father created this situation through his own illegal actions. She shouldn't be forced to endorse his fraud simply because the consequences of his actions are severe. The question stands, Colonel Morrison said coldly. Ms. Rodriguez, do you want your father to take your place? Every eye in the room was on me. Mom silently pleading. Nina crying quietly. Dad, his face a mask of resignation and regret. Captain Walsh, her jaw tight with barely contained anger at the manipulation. And me, sitting in a government hearing room, being asked to choose who lives and who dies. What I want, I said slowly, is for my father to face the consequences of his own choices, the same way I've been forced to face the consequences of his choices. What I want is for the law to mean something. What I want is justice. That's not an answer, Major Henderson said, not unkindly. Yes, it is, I replied, meeting his gaze. My father committed fraud. The law says that invalidates the consent. What happens to him after that, deployment, criminal charges, whatever, those are the natural consequences of his actions, not my decision. You're trying to make me responsible for his fate, but I'm not. He's responsible for his own fate. He was the adult. He made the choice. Dr. Keene was writing furiously, her expression unreadable. Colonel Morrison studied me for a long moment, then looked at Dad. Mr. Rodriguez, do you have anything else to say? Dad's voice was thick when he spoke. I just want to say, Elena is right. This is my fault, my responsibility. If the panel voids the substitution, that's what should happen. I don't want my daughter dying for my mistakes. The panel members excused themselves to deliberate. We sat in awful silence for 27 minutes. I counted every one on the wall clock. When they returned, Colonel Morrison's expression told me nothing. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this panel finds that the consent form signed by Elena Rodriguez was obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation. The substitution agreement is hereby voided, effective immediately. My knees went weak with relief. I was free. I wasn't going to war. But Colonel Morrison wasn't finished. However, he continued, and my brief moment of joy evaporated, we've also reviewed the current deployment needs and Mr. Rodriguez's essential worker status. Given his skills in infrastructure engineering, which are critical to national security, and given his age and physical condition, which make him unsuitable for combat deployment, we're making the following determination. He paused, and I felt the trap closing even before he spoke the words. Thomas Rodriguez's deployment is deferred pending reassignment to a domestic engineering corps position, effective in 90 days. Elena Rodriguez's deployment orders are voided. Neither party will face criminal charges at this time, though both remain subject to standard draft eligibility should the need arise. I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. So, he doesn't go. Mr. Rodriguez will serve, but in a domestic capacity utilizing his actual skills rather than as a combat soldier. This serves the military's needs more effectively than sending an untrained 56-year-old to a combat zone. But that's exactly what he wanted. The words burst out of me. He gets to stay home, keep his job, face no real consequences. Ms. Rodriguez, Colonel Morrison interrupted, your father will be serving his country. That he'll be doing so in a role suited to his abilities rather than dying uselessly in basic training is not a failure of justice. It's common sense. You're free. Your deployment is cancelled. I suggest you accept that victory and move on. Captain Walsh put a hand on my arm, a silent message. Don't push it. We won. Leave it alone. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like Dad had found another loophole, another way to engineer his way out of consequences while I was left with nightmares about what almost happened. What still could happen if I ever got drafted on my own. The hearing was adjourned. Everyone stood, gathering papers, murmuring congratulations. Mom rushed over to hug Dad, tears streaming down her face. Nina looked at me uncertainly, torn between relief and understanding how hollow this victory was. Dad approached me slowly, cautiously. Elena, I know this doesn't fix anything between us. No, I agreed. It doesn't. But I want you to know I meant what I said in there. I was ready to face deployment. I was ready to accept the consequences. You were ready, I said quietly. But you didn't have to. You never have to, do you? There's always another angle, another solution that keeps you safe while everyone else pays the price. That's not fair, he protested. I admitted to fraud. I confessed to everything. And got exactly what you wanted anyway. Domestic service. No combat. No real risk. You played this perfectly, Dad. You always do. I walked away before he could respond, before the anger could turn to tears. Captain Walsh caught up with me in the hallway. I know this isn't the outcome you wanted, she said. But Elena, you're free. That's what matters. Am I? I looked back at the hearing room, at my family clustered together like they'd survived some disaster. Or did I just learn that nothing I do matters? That the system is rigged, the rules are flexible, and the people with power will always find a way to win? She didn't have an answer for that. I left Fort Hamilton alone, driving back to the house that didn't feel like home anymore. Jake called twice, I didn't answer. Nina texted asking where I was. I left her on read. When I finally walked through the front door, everything looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago, before the knock at 4:47 a.m. Same furniture, same family photos, same comfortable lie of normalcy. But I was different. I'd learned what I was worth to the people who claimed to love me. I'd learned that signatures could be forged, consent could be manufactured, and justice was just another word for whatever outcome the powerful decided to engineer. I went to my room and started packing. Not for deployment, for departure. Nina found me 2 hours later, my belongings spread across the bed. "Where are you going?" "Anywhere but here," I said, folding a sweater with mechanical precision. "Elena, please. I know you're angry, but we're still family." "Are we?" I looked at her. "What does that word even mean, Nina?" Because from where I'm standing, family means people who'll trade your life for their convenience and call it love. Dad made a mistake. Dad made a choice, I corrected. A calculated, deliberate choice. The only mistake was getting caught. She sat on my bed, hugging my old teddy bear. "So what, you're just leaving? Never coming back?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be the daughter they want me to be. When I'm not living in a house where my own father valued me less than his job security." "He loves you." "Maybe," I said. "But he loves himself more. And I can't live with people who think that's acceptable." I finished packing as the sun set, loading my car with everything I couldn't bear to leave behind. Documents, photo albums, the few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from Nina and Mom, not Dad. Never Dad again. As I carried the last box to my car, I found him waiting by my trunk. He looked older than he had that morning, worn down by a victory that felt like defeat. "I know you can't forgive me," he said. "Maybe you never will. But I need you to know, I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to survive." "We're all trying to survive, Dad," I replied, closing the trunk. "The difference is some of us don't destroy our children to do it." "Where will you go?" "Does it matter? You'll just find a way to engineer a solution if I'm inconvenient again." That hit home. I saw him flinch. "Elena, please. Don't leave like this. Stay, and we can work through this together as a family." "We're not a family," I said, and saying it out loud made it real. "We're people who share DNA and a mailing address. That's all we've ever been, I think." I was just too naive to see it. I got in my car and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Mom standing in the doorway, Nina beside her. They looked like a painting, family portrait at dusk. But I wasn't in the frame anymore. I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look back. 3 blocks away, I had to pull over because I was crying too hard to see the road. I sat there in my parked car, sobbing for the family I'd lost, not to deployment or death, but to the casual cruelty of a father who'd valued his own comfort over his daughter's life. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Heard the good news from your sister. You're free. Want to celebrate?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing. "Can I stay with you for a while? I need some space from my family." His response came immediately. "Of course. Stay as long as you need. I'm here." I drove to Jake's apartment as the last light faded from the sky, leaving behind the house where I'd grown up and the people I'd thought were my family. I was free from deployment, free from the war, free from the uniform that had knocked on my door before sunrise. But I'd never be free from the knowledge of what my own family had been willing to do to me. That would follow me forever, a ghost dressed in my father's signature, haunting every relationship, every trust, every moment when I had to decide if the people around me were who they claimed to be. The uniform had knocked at 4:47 a.m., and in walking through that door, I'd learned the cruelest lesson. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. And no panel, no hearing, no legal victory could ever undo that truth. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional true stories that explore the complicated reality of family, betrayal, and survival. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation? Share your story in the comments below. You're not alone in facing impossible choices. Remember, you deserve to be valued by the people who claim to love you. Never settle for less.